Welcome to a new episode of Hilando Ideas. Today, we have a special guest coming from outside of the country. His name is Christopher Lingle. He's an author and an economist from the University of Georgia. He has written multiple books, multiple articles, and he has had teaching appointments at various universities around the world, including the Universidad Francisco Marroquín in Guatemala. And he's had research appointments in many places around the world, including the American Institute for Economics Research. Chris, welcome.
Yeah, good to be here.
Good to have you.
Yes.
So today I want to pick your brain on China, communism, how it affects the West, how it affects Latin America. And I know that you are an expert in this type of topics. So today I will want to start by asking you, do you think that China is a communist society? In Chile, for example, we have our own Communist Party that has expressed this aberration for the Communist Party of China, and they tend to express that they admire the success, the economic success that China has, and that the Communist Party of China has driven that success. So I would like to first start by identifying, in your opinion, is China a communist society, capitalistic? What do you think?
No, it's not. It's a Leninist society. They dropped the Marxism so that they have, in a sense, a fascist system. And I'm not surprised that the Communist Party here would admire Lenin because it's a dictatorship. And most communist parties want a dictatorship. They tried it once with Allende. Didn't work out so well. But we have to understand that communism is the sort of social ownership of capital, and that doesn't exist anymore in China. There is a socialist, a dictatorial control of capital. The members of the Communist Party in China, there's only about 5% of the population. It's a high honor, and in fact, it's kind of like joining the mafia. You have to join, or bad things will happen to you. So people do it because they have to. If you become a successful business person, they will induct you into the Communist Party as a way of putting you under their control. So I think the inevitable outcome of Marxism or communism is dictatorship. In a sense, that makes it communism. But it's a Leninist party. Lenin believed in one party state, a dictatorship of the proletariat, a justification for suppressing or controlling all economic factors.
And what about business in China? They sell a lot to the world. So how does that work? That's not part of a capitalistic system that they have, maybe in a smaller region.
Well, see, capitalism, as I would understand it, means that the ownership of capital can be transferred either through a stock exchange or through a trade purchase. Now, foreign companies that come to China, they never have more than 49% ownership of the establishment that they, for example, Volkswagen or General Motors or whoever. So what happens is that, the Chinese partners will have ultimately control, which in many cases has allowed them to actually take over a company, take it away from the minority stockholder. Now, in terms of transfer of ownership of capital, the stock exchanges in China are almost all state-owned enterprises. There are very few private, and there are very few private banks. I mean, the private banks are almost symbolic, and they don't really have a big impact. So you got state-owned businesses, state-owned enterprises that are the dominant part of industrial processes in China. And of course, on the other hand, there are many innovative companies that are very energetic and advanced technology, but many of them, some of their success is based upon subsidies or tax advantages, which you can do and get away with if you're a dictatorship. Now, China has massive debt problems. And you can cope with those debt problems or bankruptcies if you had dictatorship. So what we're seeing in China is kind of it's a muddy mix of private activities with a great deal of dictatorial control or Keynesian interventions and so it's but it's not a free market or freewheeling capitalist country by any means.
So it's a lot of centrally planned.
Well, it's not centrally planned, but it is under the control. It's Leninistic. That is, the government ultimately will be the decider of who succeeds and who fails. And that will also mean who has the ownership rights to a particular industry. Like Jack Ma he disappeared for some months because he was going against he challenged the regime.
And then he came back to be great about their key cards. So do you think in that sense, citizens of China have basic human freedoms?
In a way, it's a bit like Singapore. You could get away with a lot economically as long as you don't challenge the political authorities. Once you challenge the political authorities, you may be literally dead. You'll be imprisoned, you'll be liquidated, you'll be sidelined, you'll be bankrupt, and they'll make life miserable for your family. This is what they do in Singapore, and in a way, China has adopted that model, but on a national scale or civilizational scale. Singapore is a city-state. They can get away with, in the way that a big country with diverse economy and a diverse geography and a rural underclass that is very, very large in China. Singapore doesn't have that. So it's a little bit easier to control. And also, Singapore has, the vast majority are ethnic Chinese, which are a little bit easier to control because they have a Confucian sort of history and an attachment to Confucian ideas, which tend to make people more accepting of authoritarian rule. And, China doesn't help. So China is a little bit more unstable in that regard.
I've heard you say before elsewhere that you have sort of a love affair for China. Would you mind telling us why that is?
Why are you talking?
Like you have sort of like a special connection to China.
Yeah, it goes back to my family history. My grandfather was in the U.S. Navy, and he brought back artifacts and antiques or whatever that were in my family home. So I saw these, a geomancer's compass with this scribbly writing. It was Chinese calligraphy. And I began it made me curious. I mean, why do people have a language that is unreadable? Why don't all of us have the same language? So it just created a curiosity. And now I carry it with me. And so in 1987, I applied for a position that was advertised in the Economist newspaper, news magazine. They were inviting international experts in economics to teach in China. So in 1987, I was then living in South Africa, which made it complicated because they didn't have relations. Anyway, I made it to China somehow and taught for 6 months to officials from the finance minister. And it was interesting because the textbook that they selected for me to teach from was one that had two models of economic organization. One was a decentralized market economy, and the other was a centrally planned economy. Of course, there was no mention of the Communist Party of China, but I could criticize centrally planned economies all I wished. In fact, that was what they wanted us to have the finance ministry officials understand what the market economy was. Because I had that sort of that feeling or affection for China, and I bought Chinese art, Chinese ceramics, I acquired these things and they were around me. So I jumped at this opportunity to go there. And I got there at the beginning. Well, it was into the sort of reform momentum. But when I arrived, the first demonstration that was eventually leading to the Tiananmen incident, as the Chinese called it, or the Tiananmen massacre, as it's known outside, it occurred in Shanghai. And it really was a reaction not to a love or a desire for democracy, but it was a cri de coeur. It was a cry of anguish over the impact of inflation on the students and the workers who had fixed incomes. So they were saying, government, please help us, not government, be more democratic. Just, and in fact, Tiananmen was about that. It wasn't about the goddess of democracy, which CNN portrayed it to be. It was really, look, you're the friend of the people. You promised that you will protect and help us. Now, we're in pain. So please solve this inflation problem. And it got out of hand, and they wound up murdering some number of students. It may have been 5 or 10. It may have been thousands. We'll never know, perhaps.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about those reforms, since you lived there during that time? This happened in 1978. A bunch of economic reforms that are said to have brought millions of people out of poverty in China. Were these for market reforms? Is that what we can call it?
Well, they were actually spontaneous reforms that began in the sort of agricultural provinces of southern China. And the Communist Party at first was quite concerned because, this sort of market liberalization goes against our Marxist-Leninist sort of ideology. And then they realized, they looked at what was happening in, East Europe, Central Europe, and Russia. And they said, in a very pragmatic way, because the Chinese tend to be, certainly at that time, were very pragmatic. Zhou Enlai was much more open to the kind of what Lenin called the new economic policies that he introduced to the Soviet Union when collectivization was failing. And so Deng Xiaoping, taking over from Zhou Enlai, said, well, look, this is a way for us to keep power. The Chinese people are miserable, but this is, this modernization or this liberalization of these agricultural economies, Chryseos, keep us in power because people are getting better off. So what they did, they allowed the agricultural sector to sell in a open market a small fraction of what they produced. The rest of it would be sold to the state at a fixed price, which it kept them poor. The rural and agricultural sectors were the poor sectors of China at the time, which is ironic because Mao won the revolution through the peasants. It was a campesinos revolution, but they were the ones that were being punished. They were being, kept poor so that they could keep the urban elite peaceful, because all revolutions start in the cities where you have people that are unhappy or dissatisfied. It's easier to get them to join a mass demonstration against governments. So this is what happened. And of course, the Communist Party takes credit about it's our idea, but it was really a spontaneous sort of liberation of markets through farmers beginning to try to sell, what they produced at market prices. And, this is called the household responsibility system. And it developed eventually where they allowed the manufacturing to enter into a similar sort of process where markets were deciding on prices rather than central plant.
Okay, so it wasn't about an ideological sense of...
The truly pragmatic, they wanted to remain in power. And they realized that if they kept people miserable, and again, TV or, international, information flows became very difficult to conceal or to repress. So they realized that much like in the rest of, like in the other communist countries, that they would be potentially overthrown out of this sort of outrage of the population being kept poor when other countries were allowed to become rich.
Okay, so nowadays, I brought you data from the World Bank. I looked at it in 2024. GDP per capita in China is around 80% of that of Chile, adjusted for purchasing parity and everything. However, there's this rhetoric of like China being a successful country, even comparable with European countries, with the United States. I hear that a lot in Chile and in the West in general. Why do people have that rhetoric in their heads when really China is not a successful country, well-being measures, even like compared to Chile, which is a moderate rich country?
Well, I think because most people go to the cities, and the cities in China are a gleaming success story. Shanghai in 1987 was still very backward when I arrived at the airport. The roads were not lit. I arrived late at night. There were potholes in the road. It was a very, almost, sort of not a frightening, but it's kind of like an uncertain travel into the main, to the city center. Yeah. And of course now it's a wonderful place. What's happened in China, that there's still a very large and quite poor agriculture sector, or non-urbanized sector of China, which is what brings the average down. So if you get outside of the gleaming metropolis of Shanghai or Shenzhen, or just in Shenzhen, Shanghai, this few months ago, and they're wonderful. I mean, they're some friends of mine were encouraging me to live in Shenzhen because there's a beachfront there that people go surfing. The surfing, and it's very cheap because it's overbuilt and the rents are very low. And that's part of the other thing. The Chinese government has followed, in some ways, a kind of Keynesian wet dream, that is directing resources into government projects. But the good news was they moved it into projects that actually enhance productivity instead of redistributing. And one of the great failures of Keynesian policies in the West is it's an excuse for redistribution. And so that's just consumption, and that's wealth destruction. But in China, they created a very good transport system. It requires massive subsidies, but at least, it allows, the transportation of manufactured goods and people throughout China. So that these have been some kind of efficiency enhancing expenditure by the state or by provincial governments as well. But it's kind of a Ponzi scheme. It's all motivated by provincial governments leasing out land and in order to build the next project. But then they have to lease out more land to cover the expenses or the interest expenses. So it's like what we call a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme, that it has to keep growing or it will collapse. And China, they had a massive bankruptcy of one of the Evergrande real estate development companies. So I thought this would be the beginning of, more bankruptcies. But, of course, being a dictatorship, they could paper over these things because they shift resources from one sector to another. Now, I tell the story that when I'm out of China, I used to be very pessimistic. I said, well, if they don't have, democracy, they've got a dictatorship, and, they don't have the rule of law. There's insecurity of contracts. In India, India has the English language. They have, a broad acceptance of the rule of law. And of course, I go to India and I become pessimistic. And then I would go to China and become optimistic, because until Xi Jinping became dictator, I saw evidence of advancement. The young people were living their lives. They were doing what they wanted to do. Their outward appearance and material condition were improving every year. They still are, but there is a great deal less freedom of speech. In particular, all the groups that I would meet with for the last 15 years or so, they've been either silenced or no longer exist. And our meetings that were once very open and unaffected by official surveillance have been either canceled or have become impossible. And so this year may be my last year of having what had been an annual event where I met with students and then maybe either conservative or liberal, classical liberal or libertarian Chinese. So I'm a little bit, I see this sort of possibilities of interacting on a sort of with a conversation about, liberty and human rights and so on. It's really become less and less possible in China.
So civil organizations are not discussing that subject.
So some of them no longer exist. Yuru was probably the premier sort of free market think tank in China. And one day, toward the end of the day, workday, they came and the government sealed the doors closed with the people inside. There was no official explanation, but the message was clear. The owner of that property who has been donating it or allowing the Yunru to use it was informed that it would probably not be a good idea for him to continue doing so. So they were allowed out eventually. And it ceased to exist. So this was, again, and the next year we were going to meet. And so we had an advance notice. We were going to meet in this nice restaurant. And the night before, a phone call was received by that restaurant that said, well, it wouldn't be a good idea for that group to meet there. No identity, but everyone knows who it was or why it was. And so we had like a flash mob. And the next morning at 8 o'clock, they said, okay, we met this noodle restaurant in a small side street, and we all converged there. And that was the last meeting we had. So, and we were not stopped from meeting, but in that instance. But I think people got the message. We used to meet at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences at the People's University. Okay, openly, no more. These things of all these possibilities for discussing alternative economic ideas, especially open and free markets, rule of law, and so on. It's become virtually impossible in China.
And in that same avenue, the Wall Street Journal earlier this year published an article saying that a bunch of data that give official sources of the government have disappeared. Land sales, soy production, government. And that also raises the issue of how trustworthy are the numbers that the government does provide, such as GDP growth, which is, they say it's 5%, but many other experts say it could be as low as 2%. So what's happening here? Is it that they're trying to hide something?
Well, many years ago, I wrote an article challenging the Chinese statistics in terms of their growth rates were 10%, predictably 10% for many years. And it turns out that the Wall Street Journal ran an article that really amused me. Mark Twain said there were lies, damned lies, and statistics. And the headline in the Wall Street Journal, and this is in 1992, was Lies, Damn Lies, and Chinese Statistics, which confirmed my sort of disregard for the reliability of the official data. So anything that would make the government look bad, they try to suppress. At one time, a journalist saw some data that was accidentally available on the stock of gold in China, and he was punished for making it public. Now, again, it was just there. I mean, he didn't hack into the Chinese. No, it was just someone accidentally released it. So he didn't really pass judgment about what did he just report, and he was punished for doing that. So this is the nature of a dictatorial regime, and why your Communist Party likes that, because your Communist Party wants to control people, or they will ultimately control people if it's necessary. They may regret it, or they may issue, they probably won't. But this is a pattern that, and either they are disingenuous in Chile, the communists, or they're ignorant of history, or they're just cynical. They don't, they know it's going to happen, and they're just going to go through with it and pretend like they're sorry for those kind of repressions. But this is a historical pattern that's undeniable. They will say that's not real communism, but it is. It is inevitable.
So in the past couple of years, we've seen huge strides in the development of AI, and China has been a huge player in companies developed chips and AI models. Do you think the advancement of computational capabilities will allow for maybe an easier time of planning the economy or having sort of a control in China?
No, I think this is, again, this was the argument that, computerization, as it was, say, 20 years ago, that will solve the socialist calculation problem. And now it's AI. Well, it won't, because unless we are all plugged in to some AI collecting agency or device, human beings are mercurial. We change with the weather. We change what we need. Because it's raining, we need an umbrella or a rain jacket. You can't play unless you know that it's raining or it's going to rain. But very often, most of us are caught out, when it starts raining. We have to buy an umbrella because we didn't bring one. So how are you going to predict that? AI going to do that? I'm very skeptical that it will. And our tastes and preferences change. I see your shoes, and I say, oh, those shoes are better than mine. I'd rather have those shoes. I didn't know you were going to have those shoes, and I didn't know how I'd react when I saw them. So I tend to be an arch individualist. I'm a very extreme individualist in the sense that, individual tastes and preferences and values are subject to change momentarily, and for reasons that we couldn't anticipate ourselves. I liked you, and we have a nice conversation, so I admire your taste in your restaurants or something, so I go there because of your recommendation. These are, unless we believe that AI is going to read our minds, and that's maybe a possibility, but I suspect that that's not going to happen. So I'm a little bit less. I don't see a dystopian future because of AI. The dystopian future that we will have is because of the willingness for people to give in to the misinformation about collective the collectivization of political power, either as a fascist state or a communist state. For me, they're the same. They're both about controlling human beings, directing their lives, suppressing their interests and values, trying to direct them in some way that fits within their plan. So I think that's a much bigger threat to human liberty than AI is.
And on another note, China is known for trying to influence other countries, and in the recent years in Latin America, we've seen huge influx of Chinese capital. buying businesses and stuff. In Chile alone, there's been 25 to 30% growth of Chinese malls that are opening in our cities, and we haven't seen that before. It's very rare. So, why do you think this is going on? And is there a danger to it? Because they have also put money or bought many businesses that could be strategic, such as ports. In 2021, we had a whole thing when a Chinese company was in charge of manufacturing our passports, and then the Chilean authorities were like, "Okay, you're not going to do that. It's going to be another company." So, is it a strategy from China that's trying to control certain strategic businesses?
I think if these were Japanese companies, there would be no question because they are private. Now, the problem with Chinese companies, most of them, if they're not owned by the state, they're controlled by the state. And this is why people are allergic to, like the gringos were worried about the Panama Canal being controlled by Pachasimopo, which is the Hong Kong company, but of course Hong Kong is out under the control of China, of Beijing in particular. So I think the issue comes is, are these sort of purchases going to be used for either an ideological or a geopolitical purpose? And that question would never be asked about Japanese companies or French companies or German companies. Why do we keep asking about Chinese? Well, because there is a danger that when companies or enterprises are controlled by the state, and the owners are compelled to be members of the Communist Party, and even the managers will be put under pressure by the Chinese government. Maybe they arrive in Chile to be purely private, but at some moment, if it's advantageous to the geopolitical concerns of the Chinese government, they will be put under pressure. Their families will be put at risk, and it will be made very clear to them that if they don't cooperate with the Chinese government, there'll be consequences. So that's the issue. Okay, now the Latin Americans have always been allergic to American investments, and there's very little, despite the fantasies about the CIA connections. The CIA is a bureaucracy, which means that they're just as stupid as any other bureaucracy, and they're probably as ineffective as any other bureaucracy in government. But there's this sort of image that the gringos are going to take us over, and they just want to sell to us. Okay, but there's an embrace of the Chinese, a sort of a naive embrace of the Chinese, whereas a hesitation or even a hatred for American investments, resistance to American investments, which is very peculiar. Now, of course, I think Chileans will be better off if you import more from China, because it will make you richer, and that means that you have more money left after buying these Chinese goods, that you can buy more Chilean goods with the money left over. So Chilean restaurants, Chilean services, maybe other products, or so on. And the advancement of the Chilean economy will allow investments to be drawn in from other countries. They say, wow, people there are getting richer, so we want to invest there or make goods available there. So, again, dealing with the Chinese is really a Faustian bargain in the sense that you're making a deal with the devil. So as long as you know it's the devil and you protect yourself, that's fine. But again, demonizing the gringos while embracing the Chinese with naive and open hearts and closed eyes can lead to problematic outcomes.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. It's been lovely. It's been a pleasant conversation. I hope you enjoyed Chile.
Yeah, I am. Thank you very much.
So this was an episode of Hilando Ideas. Please follow us on social media, and we'll see you in the next episode.